dynamic for the future, and we have the social movement, we have the population, the people that it is suffering because of the climate extreme event. So the point is, how can we combine the economic gear and the social gear to make the political to continue moving towards achieving our objective? But also let me use an analogy that early in the morning, because of an interview I brought into the table. We are in a time in which we are suffering the climate debate pandemics. No? We have some virus, no? That it's coming and that it can affect us. The point it is, we have already learned how to manage a virus. And we know that if we are able, thank you, Lillian.
Thank you. So sorry.
So we know that if we are able to define a clear and gradual process towards a strong 2030, that it is the end of the decisive decade, we will be able to build back better. So the process needs and deserves to be very active and strong in these coming years as a way to get to 2030 with strong outcomes and with a strong achievement. That is key. But as it was in pandemics, we have to keep the public services alive. So we have to keep some element of the process. We have to define new ways and innovative ways to keep this process alive. Let's imagine we are in a pandemic, but also we do need to map the genetic code of the virus. So what are those problems that we have to sort? So that is the way to do it. We have to keep, since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, we knew that it wouldn't be easier. We knew that we would have some difficulties. Now we are facing those difficulties. People is losing trust on the process. People, it is demanding that we are not on track. People, it is demanding that we haven't aligned our actions with our objective. So we do need to recognize that. Let me finish this reflection by bringing what are the WWF expectations for COP29. We released an expectation paper that are including first the NCQG, because this COP, it is about finance. Even when you came into the venue, you have already seen the announcement, the sign saying no, that this is about resource mobilization. And when it is about the NCQG, it is not just about the quantum. It is the quality of resources. It is the access. It is the structure. So there are many, many elements related to the NCQG that we hope we can get by the end of this COP. But also it is about financial pledges for adaptation and for loss and damage. Also it is about how can we implement NDCs, no, in an effective way, because we are entering into the NDC 3.0. And we do need to make the difference. So we have to make, or we have to avoid to have, as it was with iPhone 14 and 15, that nowadays get the difference in between the 14 and the 15. In this case, the iPhone or the NDC 3.0 have to make the difference with the former, because with the former NDCs, we was not able to put the world on track. So those are the elements that are in our expectation papers, and for sure, the importance of the political signal. So that is why for today we have this strong set of leaders of the climate debate, a very good group of friends, and I do want to open the debate, and again, welcoming you all, and thanking and transmitting our gratitude for being the panelists for the opening of Panda Hub. So Rachel, let's start with you. How can we sort difficulties, and how can we get our expectation for the current COP29? Sorry that we just have one.
Good afternoon, and thank you for welcoming me to Panda House. And it's lovely to be here. So, multilateralism, and this is one of the remaining functioning parts of multilateralism, because however difficult, however slow and suboptimal, this is a place where everybody is and everybody is talking. So with multilateralism, it is sometimes 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Sometimes it's a leap. Sometimes it's stagnation. But you can never give up on it. And you have to keep maintaining the space where you can have a degree of trusted conversation. And so, whereas when you look around the world, you can see events that individually and collectively make you pause about the mixed signals about what we as humanity think that we're doing, you've got to keep on investing in this multilateral process. And we are still able to talk about climate here at COPs. We're talking about climate on the board of the IMF. We're talking about climate in the boards of the MDBs. We're talking about climate WTO. Climate is one of the places where we are still all talking to each other. Business to do here. We have business to transact, and there may be something happening on January the 20th, but we've got business to transact here. And that's around Article 6 and being able to build high integrity carbon markets that benefit countries who need to speed their transitions but also have nature to protect. And we have, of course, NCQG and the broader conversation around climate finance. If we don't make progress on these things, then I think it makes it very difficult for Brazilian leadership that's coming next. And it will, I think, make it more difficult for other partners outside of government to really play a role. So what is the kind of government leadership that we've got to see here and that we would expect to see? So we have a new government in the UK. This is the first COP for the new government. You will see our Prime Minister, our Foreign Secretary, our Energy Secretary, our Development Minister, our Climate Minister, the new envoy. We're here. Leadership is about showing up. Leadership is about leading by doing, not just by saying. So listen with interest to the Prime Minister's speech tomorrow around coming early with an ambitious NDC, around the fact that we closed our last remaining coal plant just a few weeks ago, and what it means and what it takes to engineer that kind of transition, and our willingness to be a trusted partner to help other countries do the same. Our willingness to engage on how to mobilize private finance, not only stewarding our own precious public resources carefully, but also then leveraging the private sector and using the City of London effectively. So I think we think that no matter what clouds you see on the horizons or what clouds you think are overhead, this process is important. Everybody is an equal partner in this process, and leadership is about showing up, being pragmatic, being practical, helping, and to secure an ambitious NCQG. This means driving the negotiations into the art of the possible, and really being able to stand up and be counted. And so I hope that the UK will play its role. I know we will play the role to our best of our ability over the next 2 weeks.
Thank you, Michelle. You have mentioned many, many important things. First, the importance of multilateralism. No, you know that I think it was in the last year, just before of COP28, when the Pope released a letter, Laudato Deum, I think it was called, in which he mentioned about the importance of a more democratic multilateralism. And it's important because after COP28 and because of the number of people that assisted to COP28, some people were thinking on we should reduce numbers. We should split this into negotiators on one side, civil society and the other groups in some other side. In my personal point of view, that would be a big mistake, because the current and the new multilateralism means to have parties and non-stakeholders talking each to other and working together, and fully agree with you, Rachel. But also you mentioned the importance keeping progress. That is fully true. We have to show that we are able to continue making this process to evolve. So that is why I do want to ask you, Anna, how much do you think the economy, the global economy, that it is adopting some climate considerations could help to sort the current barriers of the political process?
Well, thank you very much. I think the key question of the moment, because our businesses are understanding more and more that the future is in a carbon neutrality neutral business. I think that was a clear signal that came out of Dubai last year. Also came out before, and by sending these signals from the political arena, we make it clear that investments pay off in businesses that provide modern technologies that we and our children will be able to sustain on, right? And I think we're already seeing this transition really taking off. Just last year, 58% of the investments in the electricity sector went into renewable energy instead of fossils. The investments in the car industry go towards electric cars. I mean, just look into what is happening in China here. So we have the technology that is there, and it's clear that these are the ones that will be paying off, and therefore I'm also very optimistic that not only by us assembling here, having these political conversations about how we want to implement now the consensus that we found in Dubai last year, but also that is, I think, a strong force for keeping momentum into in the climate transition, but also by the businesses doing their part and by making it clear that there are a lot of opportunities for better jobs, for sustainable growth in this whole. I think this is also how we can address this virus that you talked about in the beginning, the virus that is going around now in our societies of a lot of disinformation, actually trying to tell people that, I don't know, maybe the climate crisis is not real, right? I mean, just looking to Spain, for instance, in Europe, shows you it's very real, it's becoming more and more real. So I think it will help us to address this virus of the climate deniers, that we actually can show, look, it's real, and we have solutions of how we can build a healthier, a better future with prosperous economies as well that don't rely on burning fossils.
Yeah. And, sorry. And two things, Anna. The first one, it is that it is true that the economy based in climate consideration, it is showing that we can create more jobs and more opportunities for people. I think that 2 days ago I was reading an article about the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and how much more jobs that law, that it is based in an economic purpose, that it is to reduce inflation, it has created new jobs. It's amazing. It's amazing. So the opportunity is there. So I do want to go back to you, Anna, just to ask you, what have we learned from Europe because of the role of regulation? Because Europe, it is showing the way in some way, no, by strong regulations that are, for example, demanding not to have non-credible climate claims, or to have more disclosure, or to have reports. So, what have we learned from Europe because of regulations?
Well, thanks a lot for this question. I think one thing that we can learn from Europe is potentially the transition to renewables. Because now in Germany we produce 60% of our electricity from renewables. EU, it's more than 50%. That was possible because of strong regulation. A and other issues. So I think that's one thing. So I think that's one thing to learn. But then on the other hand, I think there's many things where Europe can learn from other regions of the world. When it comes, for instance, to leadership in electric cars, I don't think we're doing that great. And also when it comes to allowing really real new innovation to spring off fastly, and particularly also in the finance industries, for instance. I think there really we need to get better. That's also what we're trying to do now, and the European leaders have assembled last week in Budapest and actually have talked about competitiveness of the European economy and have said again, reaffirmed that in order to be competitive as European industries, we need to be carbon neutral, but also that there are many areas where we need to get better.
Thank you, Anna. And Sephora, sometimes we are thinking in the next, but in this build upon, we are used to forgetting what we have already gotten. And in Dubai, we got a strong recognition for transitioning away from fossil fuels as part of the global stock take. So, based on that strong recognition for transitioning away. So, what should we do to build upon? What should we do to implement that transitioning away principle from fossil fuels? Because Anna has just referred to the energy transition, and the energy transition, it is not only to deploy renewables, but also it is to transitioning away from fossil fuels. So how to deliver it? And sorry that we have just one mic.
That's okay. Thank you, Manuel, and it's a pleasure to be here at the opening of the Panda Hub with this incredible panel. Look, it was a breakthrough last year in Dubai when we got a recognition of the need to phase out fossil fuels. It is, in some ways shocking that it took us 30 years to actually recognize the need to phase out fossil fuels, given that 86% of the emissions trapped in our atmosphere come from three things: oil, gas, and coal. So there's a lot that we can do, and unfortunately, I don't think we really saw it this year. So first of all, countries could be including a managed decline of fossil fuel production and emissions within their NDCs. No, not a single country has done that. In fact, only a third of the countries have even mentioned fossil fuels within their NDCs. We can also ensure this year here at COP that financing addresses the need to phase out fossil fuels, because it's not good enough just to triple renewables and to and I'm excited by the statistics that you mentioned and the growth that we're seeing in renewable investment. It's incredible, and that needs to continue. But the atmosphere doesn't care how many solar panels we build. The atmosphere cares how many fossil fuel projects we don't build. And so we need to ensure that when we're committing to expand renewable energy, that we're doing it side by side with the existing fossil fuel assets. We also need to understand that it's not a transition if we're continuing to grow the problem. So that means no new projects. That's what the science says. No new oil, gas, and coal projects fit. We already have enough. We have enough fossil fuels on the surface of the planet or under construction that if we burned it all, it would take us past 2 degrees. And right now, we're on track to produce 110% more oil, gas, and coal by 2030 than is consistent with Paris goals if we burned it. We have to stop expanding the problem. And this is something that countries continue to avoid talking about. We just spoke about the IRA and the jobs that are in the IRA, the incredible work that was done within that piece of legislation in the US to create a clean energy economy. But at the same time, the United States approved more oil and fracked gas than any other time in its history and is now the largest producer in the world. So we can't keep saying we're in a transition if we're growing the problem. So we actually need to stop fossil fuel expansion and manage a wind down. That's very clear that that's what the science says. And for too long in all of these processes, we've ignored the fact that what we build today will be what we use tomorrow. So how do we embed that within existing processes? We need strong climate ambition here. We need it within the GST. We need it within the NCQG. So on finance, that means a couple of things are really, really critical. It means grants instead of loans. It means debt forgiveness, because right now we're seeing a lot of countries continue to pursue fossil fuel expansion just to feed their debt. Oil drilling in the heart of the Amazon just to feed debt. New coal mining just to feed debt. We can't allow this to continue, and we have to change the structures that are supporting that. This year, the IMF required in many of its loan agreements that countries commit to expand fossil fuel production. We can't keep doing that if what we're saying is we want to manage the decline. Frequently when I talk about this, people say, but what about the economics? Well, we know from the World Economic Forum report this year that we're now spending $16.3 million per hour as a result of the impacts of extreme weather, the fires and the floods and the extreme weather sweeping our planet. We also know that last year fossil fuel subsidies grew. They didn't go down as the countries committed to them to. They grew to about $8 billion. That's $13 million a minute of public taxpayer money going to the most profitable companies on earth. We have to stem that. We have to stop expanding fossil fuel subsidies. We have to wind them down, and we have to start redirecting the money to protecting what we love and to building the world that we want. I want to say one more thing while I have the microphone, which is just that the Paris Agreement is absolutely critical in what it has brought us, the 1.5 degree target, the NDCs, the emission reduction plans. And it's not enough to ensure a fossil fuel phase out. And we need international cooperation. We need to support the countries that are stepping out in front and agreeing to stop fossil fuel expansion and trying to work together to create the rules and frameworks that are going to help them wind it down. Because it's not just about replacing that energy, it's also about replacing export revenues. If Colombia is going to move away from the expansion of fossil fuels, then they need to replace those export revenues. And that's going to mean new trade agreements, new tax agreements, and new debt relief. And that's why 14 nation states have now endorsed and formed a bloc of countries calling for a fossil fuel treaty as a companion to the Paris Agreement, as the work agreement to how we phase out fossil fuels. I think that bloc of nations is going to grow within the coming year. And I think many of us, whether it's businesses or cities or countries or organizations like WWF, who has endorsed the fossil fuel treaty, can work to support those countries in creating a companion agreement to the Paris Agreement.
Separate to you again, but you have just mentioned two important things. One is that we don't expect to have too much more ambitious NDCs in the next cycle when it's a bit sad. But on the other hand, you mentioned that we have to make this. So the 1 trillion question is what to do. How can we make the NDC cycle? So my question separate is how can we make the NDC cycle a more mandatory one? No, because that is part of the problem. I am always thinking that we haven't complete the net zero system for the NDCs. So as we don't have ways to track progress, as we don't have ways to point at those countries that are not fulfilling even with their own target, what to do, even more in the road towards Belém COP30. No, how can we change that? No, as a way to make the NDCs really a strong instrument to achieve objectives.
Good, Rachel will add here. Do you want to start?
Well, so I think just so take a breath. I mean, first of all, we have to honor the Paris Agreement, so we need countries to come early and big. Just to sort of, you know, we need a we need the circle to be a virtuous one, not a vicious one. And so everybody who can come early and everybody who can come, on a staged response to 1.5 needs to do so, right? And then some countries, for different reasons and election cycles and whatever, won't be able to come until a bit later, but that doesn't mean that others can't come in early. So we have to sort of goose each other into a process. But I think there is some, if we were designing or if we were perfecting the process, then there are issues that we didn't bake into Paris. So accountability, including when it comes to finance, the fact that a lot of the financing of climate, as opposed to climate finance, right, is done elsewhere. And there is no link or road map between the Bretton Woods institutions and the convention, and I'm not sure we can do that here, but I mean, it would be nice to have a tie. The second thing is, and I was having very interesting conversations about this with financial regulators and the surveillance function of the IMF, right? So the UN has struggled, I think, to come up with a sense of which countries got the policies in place that will drive its economy towards 1.5. So, and there are academic institutions and NGOs that do bits and pieces of it, but having that sort of sense of who's fit for purpose from a policy perspective. And of course, that's everything, right? So that's your industrial policy, it's your economic policy, it's your fiscal policy, your macroeconomic, your health policy, it's everything. But, if we're in an implementation era towards 1.5, having a better sense and then some people have talked about sort of having some kind of surveillance over that, right? So, that the UN itself would health check that. So I think that there are things that we can do to bolster it, but honoring it, it's got to come from the domestic conversation about what are we going to do to build competitive economies in the developed world, right? And what are we going to do to bring the trade and investment that is necessary for developing countries to be able to grow green and resilient, right? That's what this is. That's what this is about. And even the language here, right? We talk about mitigation and adaptation. We talk about loss and damage, right? All of these words, which are so important and sacred in the context of the convention, in the context of the Paris Agreement. But if we walk down the street in any of our countries, and we walk down the street in any of our partner countries, it's like, where's the growth coming from? Where's the investment coming from? Where's the trade rules coming from that will allow us to grow green and resilient? And bridging those two lexicons, I think, is very important.
Yeah, only a couple of things that I would add to that. Just to reinforce the fact that unlocking the finance is absolutely critical to ambitious NDCs. The majority of the countries cannot include a managed decline of fossil fuel production, the majority of producing countries, unless they have adequate finance. And so that doesn't just mean money on the table through the NCQG, it also means the financial structures that are going to support them. This is about rate of capital. I mean, 90% of the investment in renewables, there's great numbers this year, not in the global south. We're seeing it in the north. And so we have to look at where it's being built and what the barriers are to that kind of investment. And I think what we're seeing very clearly is that the structures are not in place to support those countries shifting. And in fact, our current structures are supporting them in continuing fossil fuel expansion. So we need debt cancellation to keep carbon in the ground. We need to be looking at proposals for that, and that's some of the things we're looking at under the Fossil Fuel Treaty. And we also need trade agreements and tax agreements that are going to support more ambition. And these things have to be connected. The mechanisms that we're looking at for international cooperation under the Fossil Fuel Treaty will help to create increased ambition under those NDCs because they're going to remove the barriers to stopping fossil fuel expansion in a lot of countries. And then finally, leadership matters and fairness matters. And that means that the wealthy countries have to put more money on the table and the wealthy countries have to act first. And we all need to stop accepting climate leadership as being allowed to be defined by countries who are continuing to expand the problem. That means we need a new criteria in all of these processes. No new fossil fuel expansion. We can't allow new projects to continue to make the problem bigger. And I think that criteria has to be included in all of these different conversations that we're having and in the structures that we're having. Because given what we're experiencing right now around the planet, we can't afford to make the problem bigger.
Thank you for you both. So Lilian is the Brazilian deputy head of delegation. I was a kid, no, I was a young guy when I went to Rio 92, no, and you did it great. It's amazing, the Rio Declaration. I think that it has been historically one of those non-binding declarations that changed the world, no? Most of the environmental law around the world, no, have been based in the Rio Declaration. And then I went back to Rio Plus 20, in which the Future We Want was released and the idea of beginning negotiation for the SDGs. So Brazil, it is now part of a troika. So the UAE, Azerbaijan, Brazil. And this event, it is to discuss not only about the expectation for COP29, but the road towards COP30 in Belém in Brazil. So what should we expect? What Brazil can, based in this strong history of good achievement, what should we expect we can get in Brazil, even more in the current times of difficulties? No? How much Brazil can give a strong impulse to the process?
Hello, good afternoon. Hello, thank you for the question. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, I think that Brazil has environmental diplomacy and now climate into into the DNA of its foreign policy. You know, the country, because of its natural resources, had to become an expert and a driver in this in the fight to protect the environment. And now, as we are realizing, we are one of the most vulnerable countries for climate change, also to drive climate negotiations. So I don't know, it comes natural to us, and because of this, we are hoping to have a transformative COP. And we are not going to do it alone. It's a party-driven process, like everybody likes to say. So we are going to propose things, and we hope that our peers will come along, and we count on our amazing and incredible civil society. Some of them are here to jump in this boat with us and try to deliver what in Portuguese we say is the COP da Virada. It's a transformational conference. And why I'm saying that? Because, you know, things are evolving very fast. And although the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement pointed out that the world is not on track to control the warming of the temperature, a lot has been accomplished, and the legal framework is there and keeps being refined. So we have all the tools, we have the principles, we have the biggest multilateral political negotiations happening. You know, this is a demonstration of this. You know, how many people here trying to push for solutions, to search for solutions, to negotiate agreements. So we have what it takes to control the problem. As the other panelists said, we have to act. You know, what science is telling us is that we have to act faster in a broader scale. No, so what I think that this COP is important not only what's happening here, but because what's happening around this COP. And this period now, this time that we are living now, is a test drive for the Paris Agreement. And why I say that? Because there are two things that will happen very shortly that will test the efficiency of this agreement, whether this will continue to be an adequate framework, or if you need something else in the near future, why not in Belém or further? Why I say that? Because until February, countries must present their second NDC. And other than being the second round of NDCs, they will be the first one informed by a global stocktake. A global stocktake that was a major work of diplomatic and political creativity, but it does point to the direction of a green future, of energy transition, of transition away from fossil fuels. Oh, I mean, all the roadmap is there. It must be implemented. So we will see how serious countries will be by designing NDCs that are informed by these guidelines, these directions. So will be the first test. And the second test is the BTRs. Will be the first time that countries are obliged to present their report on emissions and on climate policies and climate finance in a new, more modern, more rational way. So the first BTRs are due in the end of this year. So next year, by COP30, we will have hopefully almost 200 NDCs, climate policies that should be ambitions. It's an obligation. There must be a progression in relation to the current ones. And now they have a whole wish list of characteristics that they should have, like economy-wide, including our gases, aligned with 1.5 goal. So this will be very important. We will have a chance, an opportunity to assess the effectiveness of this legal framework, of the agreements that we have, and to see where we'll go from there. And also with the BTRs, we'll have all the information that we need to have a reality check, because that's what we'll be needing. So in this sense, what will happen in the next months and what will happen here in Baku regarding the new finance goal will be essential to see what we can do further in Belém.
Thank you, Lilian. And sorry that I will make you a very difficult question based in the what if not. And why the what if not? I remember that when we organized COP20 in Lima, it was just after the first cycle of at that time called the INDCs. And I remember that the report of aggregate effects by the Secretariat showed that with the fulfillment of that first cycle of the INDCs, we would raise temperature in around 4 degrees. It was dramatic, no? So we organized COP20 in Lima, then COP21 in Paris. We got the agreement. So many people is thinking that probably by February we will have some new NDCs, but we won't confirm that we have been able to put the world on track to the 1.5. And I am personally thinking that the main role for Brazil must be to rebuild trust on the process. So for sure it is to promote more synergies between climate and nature, and those kind of things are so important. But it is more to rebuild trust, to move into what Separate is saying, no? We have to transitioning away from fossil fuel. So what can we expect in that rebuilding trust?
Well, we should begin with bold and important NCQG in COP29. Because the climate regime, and we are here because of these agreements, because of the commitments we made under these agreements. And there are 3. They are not only the Paris agreements. There are the Climate Convention of 1992, the Kyoto Protocol that is still alive, and the Paris Agreement. So under these agreements, mitigation in developing countries depends on the degree of support that they get. So no support, no mitigation. And this is a very mitigation-driven process because many parties think that what we have to do. But it's true. It's something. It's a very important pillar that we must advance. But although we decide collectively what we should do, when it comes to implement, it's up to each country to do it through its national determined contribution. So it's a little bit tricky, we decide both things and then you go home and we find difficulties in transitioning, in finding the right regulations, in changing the economic system to be more effective towards climate. So when we go home, we have to face, the domestic challenges to implement. But so we need all the 5 pillars. Why only one advances? The 5 pillars are mitigation, adaptation, transfer of technology, capacity building, and finance. The other than mitigations, the others are the cousins that you disregard a little, and we meet them once a year at Christmas lunch. And then you say, oh, yeah, you exist. Yeah, okay. But so this does not help trust. We need to see finance working. Either the finance framework that we have here, which is Article 9, that says that developed countries committed to provide and mobilize resources, that's the questions of NCQG. That's what we must say here. And then we have, it's true that it's not only the public resource of donor countries that will solve the problems. It's already well understood that. But the other things that must happen, the reform of the international financial architecture, this international financial architecture that's not helping developing countries to find the fiscal space to act, this must be reformed. So, and actually Brazil was president of the G20 group this year, and we put our energy, we tried to define an agenda to discuss what are these challenges, what changes, what reforms we must do in order to relaunch finance in the scale that is needed. But still, the NCQG as an important outcome of this finance COP is really important because it will keep us going. As the GST was like a wave of light in the system, the NCQG has its role, and we hope we will be able to have it in 2 equal times.
Related to the NCQG. But before of that, let me make a comment in relation to what Rachel mentioned on how to move this implementation into domestic policies, the fiscal, the economic, the energy, because that is true. No, we have as WWF these NDCs we want. No, that it is the way to track progress on how we are evolving in our NDCs. But the idea it is to have the NDCs we want domestically, to have citizens demanding those political and policy changes as a way to implement our own objective in the domestic level. Having said that, to you all, what should we expect, because we don't have too much more time, what should we expect and how can we overcome barriers to get an NCQG of this COP?
Well, thank you very much. I think indeed it's crucial that we get an agreement on an NCQG this COP. Climate finance, adequate climate finance is critical, also for mitigation, as you pointed out. And I think in order to achieve this aim, we need to move ahead in the negotiations in 4 dimensions. First, we need to have a multi-layered NCQG that takes into account all available sources and instruments, both public, of course, but also private and domestic and international elements. Second, we need, of course, to meet the financing needs of the developing countries. Third, we need to broaden the donor base. It needs to be a truly global effort with more countries contributing substantially than before. And fourth, we really need to leverage also the private investments to really shift the trillions as we argue for, and therefore also to make progress here on the concrete implementation of what we've agreed on in Dubai, the big breakthroughs with tripling investments, or tripling renewables, doubling efficiency. We can only do that if we really also mobilize funding, and therefore I think also what we need to see by the end of this COP are concrete implementation steps for the aims that we set ourselves. For instance, investments in grids, investments in batteries, reduction of fossil subsidies. I'm fully here on board with what you said, and phase out of coal, for instance, right? So therefore, we have a lot to do for a successful COP, so that we give you a good start for Brazil, for Belém next year. And I'm very optimistic that with all this energy that is here, we can actually do it.
I mean, thank you. Not much to add, actually. I mean, I think this description of where a landing zone is for an ambitious NCQG is very well stated. And I think the leadership under the G20 has been quite extraordinary, because TF Klima, right, creating a space where finance ministers and environment ministers actually come together and learn how to work together. And now I think South Africa agreeing that it will continue that mechanism is so important, that our architecture doesn't allow for those two communities to come together, but Brazil's helped us fix that. So there's a yin and a yang, right? So we need progress there in order to have a strong NCQG, because that's the sort of water in which the NCQG is swimming. But we need a strong NCQG to send a strong signal that the NDCs, you know, can get financed, and that actually these things are linked together. So, but we've got work to do this week and next week in order to land that very strong NCQG. I would just say that another thing that we're very focused on in the UK is that we have to mobilize the finance, but we also have to sort of task force, especially those countries that are signing up with NDCs which are on track for 1.5, right? The top end of the Brazilian numbers that came out in their ambitious NDC recently. I won't preempt my own Prime Minister for what he's going to say tomorrow, but you know, countries that are aligned with this kind of ambition have to sort of force the removal of the barriers to the finance flowing, right? Sometimes these are policies, right? So people, you know, countries that are dispatching uneconomically on their grid, regulations around utilities. We've got to be able to help really break through, and we've done some of that under the JETPs and some of that under country platforms. But there's room for greater cooperation, and we talk about a global clean power alliance, which isn't another acronym and another club. It's a way of working together amongst ambitious countries to try to zap the blockages to the finance. So we've got implementation. I think if we follow the prescription laid down by Anna, which I think is possible, we can come up with an NCQG which is ambitious enough to be able to then see NDCs which are ambitious, and then we've got NDC diplomacy to be led by Brazil and leading nations to get to the point where we're coming in with something which is so it all links together.
Thanks, Rachel. Look, I think especially in the face of a Trump presidency, we need leadership and commitments from wealthy countries here at COP, and that means that means new funds, including dedicated resources to support fossil fuel dependent communities and workers. Things, the fossil fuel phase out, and the financing. wealthy countries should be paying at least $5 trillion per year to global south countries as annualized reparatory payments against the climate debt that has incurred. And let's be clear, they have the means to mobilize well over this amount for climate action at home and toward a new collective goal by ending fossil fuel subsidies, by imposing taxes on polluters, and by implementing wealth taxes on billionaires. The climate finance goal has to establish at least $1 trillion a year in public grants for economically emerging countries to support cutting emissions and preparing for and adapting to climate change, as well as funding to address loss and damages already occurred from extreme weather. And that amount has to $300 billion mitigation sub-goal to support a fossil fuel transition and the tripling of renewable energy capacity and doubling of energy efficiency by 2030. The adequate finance to support the expansion of renewable energy infrastructure and adaptation measures is absolutely critical to unlocking more ambitious NDCs among developing nations. And I want to add one last thing on your question of what happens if we don't. We all just saw the emissions gap report come out. I think it was last week. We're on track for something like 3.1 degrees. And even at today, we've, I think all, and I've talked to, been astonished at the impacts this year. It's much faster than anyone thought in terms of the dramatic rise in extreme weather and fires and flooding and out of control global hydrological cycles. And so what does that mean? It means every ton of carbon at this moment in history that we save from going into the atmosphere will save lives. What if we aren't successful? More lives will be lost. And that's what's at stake here. And while we talk about all these various acronyms and processes, we cannot forget that. We have to act like it's an emergency. And we have to be pushing countries to act as though it's an emergency. And we need to ensure that the wealthy countries are acting fastest and first and putting considerable money on the table to save those lives.
Thank you. This COP must deliver not only the NCQG, it must deliver on the conclusion of regulations for the functioning of Article 6 in a manner that assures environmental integrity. It must deliver on adaptation. There are discussions on indicators for adaptation. This must go on. Adaptation is the talk of the town. I cannot forget the image of a Spanish boy, a Spanish teenager, confronting the King of Spain in the floods in Valencia, and this boy was so angry, and he was saying like, how come you didn't alarm us? How come you didn't warn us that this was coming? And why the help took 4 days to arrive? And the guy was like, I was punching the King of Spain. So this is the new reality. People is not ready to be flooded, to lose their houses, their families, their pets. My city in Brazil, Porto Alegre, had the terrible floods last year, and the airport was shut down for 5 months. It's terrible, and society cannot stand anymore. So these negotiations must have a reality check, and they must evolve faster. Sometimes I'm in the rooms, and we were here last night until 4 a.m. discussing, the scope of dialogue on finance. Well, and then I was only reminding me of this image of this Spanish teenager. What you're doing here, we have to be using our time to more productively. You have to, talking to people who are bringing the solutions, discussing how we are transitioning away, finding the ways, and not fighting each other, because most of the time is what you do. So the governments, they need their societies to push them, to say enough is enough. We were waiting for chaos to do something. Let's do it in an organized time. While still there's time. IPCC says we have very little time to prevent chaos. So let's take it seriously. No, and we need the help of society. All people who are here, go talk to your negotiators. Don't block things. We need a sound outcome of this COP, and then go to the next and mobilize all other stakeholders to go forward. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult and sad. Thank you.
So thank you so much. What a fantastic way to open the Panda Pavilion, the Panda Hub. So thank to you for participating in this opening and communicate your friends or your colleagues that we have a very good calendar of events, of discussions and panels. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Sephora. Thank you, Lilian. So please join me with a big applause for this fantastic panel. Thank you very much. Thank you.